The reflection of the setting sun on the Hudson River created golden mosaics that danced on the walls of the small studio. Olivia Harlow stood motionless in front of her easel, the brush suspended a few inches from the canvas, as the blurry spot in the center of her visual field grew inexorably like a voracious shadow. We spend our lives learning to see the world, never imagining that this vision might be torn away from us. That morning, in Dr. Mercer's cold office, the words had fallen like stones into the calm water of her life. Retinitis pigmentosa, progressive degeneration, loss of peripheral vision, then central. A few years, perhaps less, before the world would become an abstract painting of lights and shadows. "Miss Harlow, I understand this is a shock," the doctor had said, his voice betraying a professional compassion. "But there are therapies to slow the progression, adaptations to maintain your autonomy." Olivia's fingers tightened around the brush. At 26, she was the rising star of New York galleries, the one whose exceptional color sensitivity critics praised. How does one paint when one can no longer see colors? The question spun in her mind like a frightened bird. On the coffee table, her phone vibrated. The screen displayed her sister's name, Rachel, the only person in the world she couldn't face right now. Olivia closed her eyes, feeling tears roll down her cheeks, their warmth contrasting with the cold invading her being. The diagnosis resonated within her like a death knell, announcing the end of all her dreams. The Metropolitan Museum of Art awaited her tomorrow. She was scheduled to guide a group through the American Impressionist exhibition, explain how Hassam had captured light despite the limitations of the technique. The bitter irony of this coincidence tore a strangled laugh from her. Standing in the dying light, Olivia made a silent decision. No one would know. Not yet. She would capture every color, every nuance, every play of shadow and light, with the greed of a condemned woman. If time was running out, she would burn until the last second in the ardent glow of her passion. The brush finally touched the canvas in a decisive movement, leaving a scarlet trail like an open wound. This painting would be different from the others. It would be the first in a new series, The Art of Seeing When You Begin to Lose Your Sight. The Metropolitan Museum of Art buzzed with feverish activity on that April morning. Olivia, impeccable in her midnight blue suit, concealed her sleepless night behind careful makeup and a professional smile. Her hands trembled slightly as she consulted her notes, the characters appearing more blurred than usual. "You seem to be looking for something, miss." The deep, melodious voice came from a man in his 40s, with a piercing gaze and hands stained with chemical products, the hands of an artist or craftsman. "I'm just finding my bearings," she replied with forced lightness. The man tilted his head, his gaze lingering on her with a disturbing intensity. "Ethan Caldwell, restorer. I'm working on the hopper on the second floor." "Olivia Harlow, guide. I show the museum to people who still need to learn how to see." Her own bitterness surprised her. Ethan gave an enigmatic smile, as if he had grasped a truth she herself was unaware of. "Fascinating profession," he said, approaching. "Teaching others to see what most don't notice." The subtle scent of turpentine and linseed oil emanating from him awakened an unexpected nostalgia in Olivia, the scent of her own studio, of her life before. "You're also a painter, aren't you?" he asked, surprising Olivia with his insight. "How? Your hands, the way you absorb the paintings. And that spot of Prussian blue under your nail that you haven't completely removed." Olivia felt an unexpected warmth invade her cheeks. This stranger had deciphered her in seconds, while she herself was becoming a stranger in her own body. "My group is arriving," she said, suddenly uncomfortable under that gaze that seemed to see beyond appearances. "Of course," replied Ethan, stepping aside. "But lives that cross by chance sometimes have a reason to find each other again. I'll be here all week." Olivia watched him walk away, his slender figure silhouetted against the museum's large windows. Something in his gait betrayed an invisible weight, as if he too carried a burden the world couldn't see. She was pulled from her thoughts by the noisy arrival of a group of European tourists. Taking a deep breath, she composed a serene face and began her presentation in front of Cape Cod Evening by Edward Hopper. Notice how Hopper captures the light filtered through the trees, creating these golden spots on the house, and that sense of impending twilight. But as she spoke, she felt her peripheral vision narrowing slightly, like an invisible curtain closing millimeter by millimeter. And in a corner of her mind, The image of Ethan Caldwell persisted, with his stained hands, and his gaze that seemed to read her like an open book. The door to the family apartment slammed with a sharp noise that echoed throughout the historic Brooklyn brownstone. Olivia dropped her bag on the hallway floor, exhausted from her day at the museum. Her mother, Diane, appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on her apron with that half-worried, half-reproachful expression she had perfected. "You missed your appointment with the specialist," she said without preamble, her voice tense with poorly concealed anxiety. "Dr. Mercer called." The aroma of chicken pot pie cooking on the stove enveloped Olivia like a childhood memory, before art became her obsession, before the future brutally darkened. "I can't spend my life in waiting rooms, Mom," she replied, with more harshness than she intended. Diane approached, her eyes scrutinizing her daughters, as if looking for invisible signs of the disease. "Would you rather wait until you bump into furniture? Until you can no longer distinguish your own paintings?" The word stung Olivia like a slap. She moved away abruptly, bumping into a vase that wobbled dangerously on the console. "I know perfectly well what awaits me, thank you," she shouted, tears in her eyes. "Can you even imagine what it's like to know that everything that gives meaning to your life is going to disappear?" The silence that followed was as heavy as the diagnosis. Diane, a former dancer forced into immobility by a hip injury, intimately knew the pain of losing her passion. Her face softened as she approached her daughter. "Sweetheart, I know it's unfair, but—" "No, you don't know," Olivia interrupted, heading to her room. "No one can know." Lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling where shadows danced, Olivia thought back to her day at the museum. The paintings she had described with a passion amplified by the fear of forgetting them, and that strange man, Ethan Caldwell, whose gaze seemed to understand what she herself refused to accept. Her phone vibrated. A message from her supervisor at the museum. "The restorer wants to meet you tomorrow to discuss the Hopper exhibition. 10 a.m., Restoration Lab." Olivia's heart inexplicably accelerated. She had prepared herself to face progressive blindness, but not the intrusion of a stranger into her self-defense fortress. Across the Brooklyn Bridge, in a Manhattan loft in the Chelsea district, Ethan Caldwell was examining a photograph of the painting he was restoring, Nighthawks by Edward Hopper. Under the harsh light of his lamp, damages invisible to the public appeared clearly. Tiny cracks, yellowing varnish, areas where the paint threatened to flake off, like the early signs of a disease, he thought, that only a trained eye could detect. The same type of signs he had noticed in the gaze of that guide, Olivia Harlow, whose passion for art shone through in every word, but whose eyes betrayed a recent wound. Ethan set down his magnifying glass and massaged his temples. At 38, after a painful divorce and years of voluntary isolation in the silent world of restoration, he had learned to be wary of emotional connections. Yet, something in that woman's gaze had awakened in him a curiosity he thought extinct. Paintings aren't the only things that deserve to be restored, he thought, turning off the light, but some restorations required an expertise he wasn't sure he possessed. The Metropolitan Museum's restoration lab resembled a medical laboratory. Harsh light, precision instruments methodically aligned, a septic odor mixed with organic solvents. Olivia hesitated on the threshold, her fingers nervously playing with the strap of her bag. Ethan didn't immediately look up from the painting he was working on, absorbed in the meticulous application of a solvent to a tarnished area. His concentration was hypnotic, almost meditative. "Restorers are the doctors of artworks," he finally said without looking at her. "We diagnose, treat, sometimes heal, but unlike doctors, we know we can't stop time indefinitely." Olivia approached despite herself, drawn to the painting. Cape Cod Evening, whose colors seemed to be reborn under Ethan's patient hands. "Why did you ask me to come?" she asked, wary. Ethan finally set down his tools and looked at her directly. The harsh light accentuated the lines of his face, witness to a life that hadn't been kind. "I need your expertise on Hopper, more specifically, on his way of working during the later years of his life, when his technique evolved." Olivia felt her heart skip a beat. Was it a coincidence or had he guessed? "There are dozens of books on the subject," she replied coldly. "I don't see how I can be useful to you." Ethan smiled slightly, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Books give facts. I'm looking for perspective. the way an artist adapts to the loss of what they consider their most precious tool, their vision. "And why does that interest you so much?" Olivia asked, defensively. Ethan shifted the painting slightly to better catch the light. "Look at this blue," he said, pointing to a fragment of sky. Hopper painted this during a period when his technique was changing. He thought he was painting a lighter blue. The degradation of the varnish has restored his original intention, but for years, the world saw an altered version of his vision. Fascinating, isn't it? Olivia approached despite herself, intrigued. In that fragment of sky, she suddenly saw a reflection of her own dilemma, the gap between what she saw and what the world would perceive. Hopper continued to paint, she said softly, even when his technique changed radically. He painted from memory, out of habit, out of necessity. "Out of necessity," repeated Ethan, his eyes suddenly softer. "Because for a true artist, creating isn't a choice, but a breath." A charged silence settled between them, as if each hesitated on the edge of a confession. "I have a painting to show you," Ethan finally said, heading to a cabinet. "A little-known work by O'Keeffe, painted during her experimental phase. The museum acquired it recently, but its attribution is contested." He pulled out a small canvas depicting a southwestern landscape, but with a strangely distorted palette, reds where greens were expected, purples where blues should be. "Some experts consider it a fake. I see the testimony of a woman who paints what she feels rather than what she sees." Olivia contemplated the painting, overwhelmed. In these incorrect colors was perhaps her future, a world where art would become a translation of sensations rather than a reproduction of visible reality. "I'll come back tomorrow," she said abruptly, moving away. "I need to think." As she left, she didn't see Ethan observe her hesitant gait, nor the worried frown that crossed his face when she narrowly avoided a table she evidently hadn't seen in her peripheral vision. The pouring rain transformed the banks of the Hudson River into liquid mirrors where trembling streetlights were reflected. Olivia, sitting on a wet bench under the Brooklyn Bridge, ignored the water that was infiltrating through her coat. The results of her latest examinations, tucked into a now damp envelope, confirmed her worst fears. The degeneration was progressing more rapidly than expected. Before her, the Hudson rolled its murky waters, indifferent to the drama unfolding. A year, perhaps 18 months before her central vision would be severely compromised. How to continue painting? How to guide visitors through painting she would barely distinguish? "Dry benches are rare tonight, but you've chosen the wettest of all." Ethan stood before her, a large black umbrella in hand. Without waiting for an invitation, he sat beside her, sheltering them both. "How did you find me?" asked Olivia, too exhausted to be truly surprised. "I was at the Morgan Library. I saw you pass by like a sleepwalker." Silence settled between them, punctuated by the patter of rain on the umbrella and the distant rumble of thunder. New York was progressively disappearing under a veil of mist and rain, like an impressionist painting where contours dissolve in light. "I received my results today," Olivia finally said, her voice barely audible above the rustle of water. "My retinitis pigmentosa is progressing faster than expected." She hadn't planned to say it, especially not to this man she barely knew, but the words had come out on their own, as if liberated by the rain and growing darkness. Ethan showed no surprise, confirming Olivia's suspicions. He had guessed since their first meeting. "Is that why you showed me that contested O'Keeffe, isn't it?" she asked, with a hint of accusation in her voice. "You knew about my vision." "I knew you were an artist confronted with something that frightened you," he replied gently. "I know that look, the one of someone who sees their world collapsing and desperately tries to cling to the fragments." Olivia felt a single tear roll down her cheek, mixing with the raindrops. "I've worked all my life to see the world in a certain way, to capture it on canvas. Without that, who am I?" Ethan remained silent for a long moment, contemplating the Empire State Building that stood in the distance, majestic despite the rain shrouding its upper floors. "When I was 30, I was at the peak of my career, principal restorer at the Chicago Art Institute, married to a woman I loved passionately," he began with a distant voice. "I spent 3 years restoring a sergeant, neglecting everything else. The day I finished, my wife announced she was leaving me. She had tried to tell me about her suffering, but I was so absorbed in my quest for technical perfection that I didn't listen." He paused, his eyes following a ferry that was silently gliding on the black water. I lost what truly gave meaning to my life, because I was unable to see beyond what I thought was my passion. These words touched Olivia more deeply than she would have liked. She had spent the last few days feeling sorry for herself, locked in her fear of losing her identity as an artist. "What should I do then?" she asked, her voice suddenly firmer. "Simply accept that everything I've worked for will disappear?" Ethan turned his face toward her, his features barely visible in the half-light. "No, you need to decide whether you are defined by the way you see the world, or by what you choose to do with it." In this moment, suspended between day and night, between vision and blindness, Olivia felt something break within her, not in a painful way, but like a hatching, a metamorphosis. She made a decision that would change everything. "I want to create an exhibition," she said, the words forming as the idea took shape, "on the evolution of my vision, documenting how I see the world as it fades away. Not to elicit pity, but to show another way of perceiving beauty." Ethan smiled in the darkness, a smile she felt rather than saw. "That's exactly what I would do if I were you." The rain was beginning to ease, giving way to that particular smell of wet asphalt and earth that follows New York downpours. "Will you help me?" Olivia asked, surprised by her own courage. "On one condition," replied Ethan, standing and offering his hand, "so that you teach me to see the world through your eyes while there's still time." Olivia's studio in Greenwich Village was bathed in the golden morning light when Ethan entered it for the first time. The walls, covered with canvases, sketches, and photographs, told the story of an artist obsessed with light in all its forms. A familiar smell of oil paint and turpentine floated in the air, mixed with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. "Welcome to my organized chaos," said Olivia, indicating the space with a broad gesture. She wore paint-stained overalls, her auburn hair held back by a colorful scarf. In the morning light, her green eyes seemed almost translucent, eyes condemned to progressively dim. Ethan approached a large unfinished painting representing a scene in a New York cafe, remarkable for its slightly distorted perspective, as if viewed through thick glass. "This is how I see now," explained Olivia, positioning herself beside him. "The edges become blurred, some colors blend together, shapes lose their sharpness at the periphery." She grabbed a brush and, with surprising confidence, added a touch of bright red to the dress of a woman in the foreground. "I've memorized every inch of this canvas. Even when I no longer clearly distinguish the colors, my fingers will remember the texture of each area, the direction of each brushstroke." Ethan observed her with silent admiration. Determination had replaced fear in Olivia's gestures, transforming her vulnerability into creative strength. "The idea of the exhibition is to create a chronological series," she continued, guiding him to a wall where preparatory sketches were pinned. "Start with my normal vision, then show how the same scene transforms as my perception changes. A metamorphosis rather than a degradation," murmured Ethan, intuitively understanding her intention. "Exactly. I don't want people to say, 'What a tragedy.' I want them to see the beauty in this transformation." She paused, searching for the right word. "As if I were progressively passing from a hyper-realist style to impressionism, then perhaps to expressionism, and finally, to something more abstract, an accelerated artistic evolution dictated by my biology." Ethan approached a small canvas that was almost entirely monochromatic, with just a few touches of brilliant color at the center, like light-piercing darkness. "And this?" Olivia's face darkened slightly. "My projection of what I'll see in a year or two. Mainly shapes, contrast between shadow and light, some persistent colors at the center of my vision." She looked away, her voice suddenly less assured. "I need help with the exhibition, not just technically, but emotionally. I want someone to tell me the truth when my work becomes incomprehensible." Ethan placed his hand on her shoulder, a simple gesture but of surprising intimacy. "I'll be that person if you allow me, but on one condition." Olivia looked up, questioning. "That you let me document your process, photograph your works at each stage, maybe even film your work, so that other artists faced with similar challenges can draw inspiration from it." A smile illuminated Olivia's face, revealing a beauty that Ethan hadn't fully noticed until then. "Deal. But I also have a condition. I'm listening. That you tell me your story. Why does a talented restorer isolate himself from the world to speak only to dead paintings?" Ethan's face closed imperceptibly, but he nodded. "That's fair. But not today. Today we work. He rolled up his sleeves and took a blank canvas. Show me exactly what you see when you look through this window. And then I'll show you how I see it. Under the changing New York sky, in this studio flooded with light, two wounded souls began to rebuild their fragmented worlds, brushstroke after brushstroke. Olivia's phone vibrated incessantly on the studio table, her mother's name flashing on the screen for the 5th consecutive time. With an annoyed gesture, she turned it face down on the table, refusing to interrupt her work session. 3 weeks had passed since the beginning of her collaboration with Ethan. The studio, once her solitary sanctuary, was now invaded by large photographs documenting the evolution of her vision, by cameras on tripods, and by technical notes scribbled in Ethan's precise hand. "Your mother seems determined," observed the latter without raising his eyes from the exhibition catalogue he was writing. "She wants me to attend my sister's engagement dinner tonight," sighed Olivia. "As if I had time for these social events when the exhibition opens in 6 weeks." Ethan set down his pen and looked at her carefully. "Maybe you should go. Take an evening away from all this." Olivia shook her head with a vehemence that betrayed her nervousness. "You don't understand. My entire family will be there, asking questions about my medical progress, looking at me with that unbearable pity, and my perfect sister announcing her perfect marriage. It's too much." She approached the painting in progress, a distorted vision of the Brooklyn Bridge in the rain, where the cables seemed to almost detach from the structure to float in the air. "My sight changed again yesterday. I lost 2 more degrees in my peripheral visual field." Ethan approached, positioning himself beside her in front of the canvas. "And look what you've created with this new vision. It's extraordinary." Olivia felt tears come to her eyes. In these last few weeks, Ethan had become much more than a collaborator, a confidant, perhaps even a friend. His stable presence, his silent understanding of her daily struggles, created a space of safety she had never known. "Maybe I should tell my family about the exhibition," she murmured, "but I'm afraid they won't understand. My mother wants me to focus on treatments, not on art." Ethan remained silent for a moment, then said softly, "You at least owe them a try." The engagement dinner was taking place in an elegant restaurant near Central Park. Olivia arrived late, deliberately, hoping to minimize interactions. Upon her arrival, the family was already seated, her mother elegant but tense, her father jovial as always, her sister Rachel radiant on the arm of her fiancé Mark, and various uncles, aunts and cousins whose gaze she carefully avoided. "Finally," exclaimed her mother with a tense smile. "We were beginning to think you had forgotten." "I was busy," replied Olivia, taking her seat, aware of the curious looks converging towards her. The meal unfolded in a strangely tense atmosphere. Discussions revolved around the upcoming wedding, the couple's plans, interspersed with polite but distant questions about Olivia's work at the museum. No one dared to directly address her illness, creating an elephant in the room that everyone carefully skirted. It was her Aunt Martha, a straightforward woman if ever there was one, who finally broke the artificial silence. "So, dear, how is your vision? Do the doctors have solutions?" An embarrassed silence fell over the table. Olivia felt all eyes fixed on her, a mix of curiosity and that compassion she so detested. "My vision is deteriorating according to the expected schedule," she replied with forced calm. "And no, there is no miracle solution, but I've decided to make something positive out of it." She took a deep breath. "I'm organizing an exhibition at the Whitney Museum. Visual metamorphoses, the evolution of my artistic perception as my vision changes." The silence that followed was deafening. It was her father who reacted first, a mix of pride and concern in his voice. "That's ambitious, my daughter." "It's morbid," cut her mother, abruptly setting down her fork. "Exhibiting your illness as an attraction?" "It's not like that at all," protested Olivia, feeling anger rise within her. "It's an artistic exploration of perception, a celebration of—" "A celebration," interrupted her mother, incredulous. "You should be focusing on treatments, not on this. Who put this idea in your head?" Ethan's face appeared in Olivia's mind, and something in her expression must have betrayed her because her sister suddenly intervened. "It's him, isn't it? The restorer you always talk about." Rachel had always had this troubling gift of reading her like an open book. "Ethan is helping me, yes," admitted Olivia. He understands what I'm trying to accomplish. Does he understand that you're destroying yourself? Asked her mother with tears in her voice. That you're giving up before you've even really fought? I'm not giving up, exclaimed Olivia, attracting glances from neighboring tables. For the first time, I'm taking control of what's happening to me, instead of letting myself be overwhelmed by fear. Why can't you see that? Because I'm your mother, replied Diane, her voice trembling with emotion, and I refuse to watch you transform your tragedy into a spectacle instead of seeking healing. Olivia stood up abruptly, knocking over her wine glass, which spilled on the white tablecloth like a scarlet wound. I'm sorry about your engagement, Rachel, she said, avoiding her sister's gaze. But I can't stay here. She left the restaurant, her heart pounding, ignoring her father's calls. The New York night enveloped her in its benevolent indifference as she walked aimlessly, tears further blurring her already compromised vision. Without thinking, her steps led her to Ethan's apartment in Chelsea. When he opened the door, his expression changed from surprise to concern. They don't understand, murmured Olivia, her voice broken by emotion. No one understands. Ethan gently drew her inside, closing the door on a world that, for the moment at least, could wait outside. The harsh light of the projectors made the Whitney Museum gallery almost clinical. 2 weeks before the exhibition opening, the space was still a construction site. Open transport crates, paintings leaning against the walls, technicians busy installing the sophisticated lighting system that Ethan had insisted on implementing. Olivia stood in the center of the main hall, a sensation of vertigo suddenly overwhelming her. The contours of objects seemed to vibrate, slightly distort, as if she were looking through an undulating glass. She closed her eyes, counted to 10 as her doctor had advised her, then reopened them. Nothing had changed. Her vision was deteriorating more rapidly than expected. "Is everything all right?" asked Ethan's voice beside her, his hand lightly resting on her shoulder. "No," she admitted with brutal honesty. "It's getting worse. I see differently today." Ethan guided her to a bench, scrutinizing her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. How differently, exactly? More blurred at the center, a sort of waves that distort the lines and the colors. She hesitated. "The red of that painting over there should be scarlet, but I see it almost burgundy." Ethan followed her gaze to one of her early works, an urban landscape of Greenwich Village at sunset, where the red of the roofs indeed played a crucial role in the composition. "You should call your doctor," he said gently. "Now." "No," replied Olivia, with a firmness that surprised even herself. "Not before the opening. I can't afford to be distracted or medicated. I need all my concentration." A shadow passed over Ethan's face. "Olivia, your health comes first. The exhibition can wait." "That's easy for you to say," she suddenly burst out. "You're not the one losing your world day by day. This exhibition is all I have left. The only thing that gives meaning to what's happening to me." The silence that followed was charged with unsaid things. Since that night when she had taken refuge at his place after the disastrous engagement dinner, something had changed between them. An intimacy had developed, made up of moments shared in the studio until dawn, deep discussions about art and perception, accidental touches that lingered perhaps a little too long. But Ethan always maintained a certain distance, as if held back by an invisible barrier. "It's not all you have left," he said finally. "You have your family, even if things are tense at the moment. You have your talent that transcends your physical vision. You have—" He broke off, as if unable to finish his sentence. "I have what, Ethan?" asked Olivia, suddenly vulnerable. Before he could answer, the voice of James Bennett, the museum's curator, resonated in the gallery. "Ah, there you both are. I have excellent news." James approached, his usual enthusiasm further amplified by excitement. "The Secretary of Culture will attend the opening. It's a huge media coup for the exhibition." Olivia's forced smile barely masked her exhaustion. "Wonderful," she managed to articulate. "We'll also have several international journalists," continued James, unaware of Olivia's discomfort. "Art news, the New York Times, BBC Culture. Your story fascinates them all." "My story? Or my illness?" asked Olivia, with a bitterness she no longer sought to hide. James had the decency to appear embarrassed. "Both probably, but it's your art that will make them stay." After the curator's departure, Ethan observed Olivia, who was staring at the exhibition space, her gaze desperately trying to grasp details that increasingly escaped her. "Come," he said gently, "let's go back to the studio. We still have adjustments to make on the last canvases." In the taxi taking them back to Greenwich Village, Olivia remained silent, her forehead pressed against the cool window. The lights of New York passed by, transforming into colored streaks through her altered vision, an involuntarily impressionist spectacle that, in other circumstances, might have been beautiful. "My mother won't come to the opening," she suddenly said. "She called yesterday to tell me." Ethan sighed, searching for the right words. "She's afraid, Olivia, afraid of seeing you suffer, afraid that you're harming yourself by exposing your vulnerability like this." "And you?" she asked, turning her face towards him. "What are you afraid of, Ethan? Why do you always stay at this precise distance, close enough to support me, but never enough to really touch me?" The question floated between them, charged with all the tensions accumulated in these last weeks. Ethan looked away, observing the Hudson River that sparkled under the nightlights. "I'm afraid of not being what you need," he finally admitted. "I'm afraid you're turning to me because I'm here, because I understand your art, but not necessarily for who I am." The taxi stopped in front of Olivia's building. She opened the door but turned before getting out. "You're wrong," she said simply. "You're exactly what I need, but I can't fight on all fronts at once: my vision, my family, the exhibition, and now us. Something has to give." She got out of the taxi, leaving Ethan alone with these words that resonated like a provisional goodbye. As she entered the building, her phone vibrated, a message from her doctor confirming that rapid vision changes required immediate consultation. Olivia turned off her phone and slowly climbed the stairs to her studio. She had an exhibition to complete, and the rest of the world, including her declining health and the complex feelings she had for Ethan, would have to wait. The studio bathroom seemed to spin around Olivia as she splashed cold water on her face. In the mirror, her reflection appeared to her as through a fog, her features distorted by invisible waves, the colors slightly offset like in a poorly developed photograph. 3 days before the exhibition opening, and her central vision was degrading at an alarming rate. The ringtone of her phone resonated in the silent apartment, probably her doctor again, or her mother, or Ethan. All these well-intentioned people who didn't understand the essential. She had to finish what she had started, at any cost. Ignoring the call, she returned to the studio, where the last canvas of the series awaited her, the one representing her future vision as she imagined it. Cruel irony, reality was already catching up with this artistic projection. Her hands trembled slightly when she grasped the brush, but her determination remained unshakable. An hour later, as she struggled to distinguish the subtle nuances on her palette, the studio door opened abruptly. Ethan stood on the threshold, his face grave, accompanied by the last person she expected to see. Her mother. "What does this mean?" asked Olivia, setting down her brush with deliberate slowness. "You haven't answered your calls for 3 days," replied Ethan, advancing into the studio. "Your doctor is worried, your family is worried, I am worried." Diane approached cautiously, like one approaches a wounded animal. Her gaze traveled over the chaotic studio, stopping at the canvases piled against the walls, the frantic sketches pinned everywhere, the unopened medications on the table. "Honey," she began softly, "you need to see a doctor. Now." Olivia let out a joyless laugh. "So they can tell me what I already know, that my vision is collapsing faster than expected, that there's nothing to do except wait for darkness." She turned to Ethan, betrayal evident in her troubled gaze. "I trusted you." "That's precisely why I did this," he calmly replied, "because I care too much about you to watch you destroy yourself." This statement, the first explicit acknowledgement of his feelings, floated in the tension-charged air. Diane approached her daughter, and with unexpected gentleness took her hands in her own. "I was wrong," she admitted, tears shining in her eyes. "I was so focused on what you were losing that I didn't see what you were creating." Ethan showed me photos of the exhibition. "It's extraordinary, my daughter, truly extraordinary." The sincerity in her mother's voice shook Olivia's defenses more than any confrontation could have done. "But now, you need to take care of yourself," continued Diane, "so you can be present at your opening to live this moment you've created." Ethan approached, positioning himself beside Diane. "Doctor, Mercer thinks a rapid intervention could slow the progression, give you more time." More time for what? Asked Olivia, her voice barely audible. To live, replied Ethan simply. To create, to feel, to be who you are beyond your vision. Something broke in Olivia. Not her spirit, but the shell of denial and fear she had built. She collapsed, caught by Ethan, whose arms surrounded her with a tenderness that said everything words couldn't express. The following hours unfolded like a hazy dream. The hospital, urgent examinations, the confirmed diagnosis, a rare but treatable complication that was accelerating the degeneration, the immediate intervention that wouldn't cure her condition but could stabilize her vision for a while. In the austere hospital room, her mother on one side of the bed and Ethan on the other, Olivia experienced a strange serenity, despite the storm raging within her. "The exhibition," she murmured, fighting against the fatigue from the medications. "James is taking care of it," assured Ethan, gently stroking her hair. "Everything will be ready for the opening. And if I can't be there?" The question contained all her fears, not seeing the culmination of her work, being reduced to a program note explaining her absence. "You will be there," affirmed her mother, with a conviction that was unlike her. One way or another, Olivia smiled weakly, letting herself drift into a medication-induced sleep. Just before sinking, she felt Ethan lean toward her, his lips brushing her forehead in a gesture of infinite tenderness. "I'll be here when you wake up," he promised, "and every day after." In the artificial darkness of medicated sleep, Olivia was no longer certain of what was real and what was dreamed. But one thing remained clear in this shipwreck. She was no longer alone adrift. The smell of antiseptic and the regular beep of monitors formed Olivia's sonic universe for 3 days. Lying in her hospital bed, eyes bandaged after the procedure, she explored a new world made solely of sounds, smells, and textures. The doctor had been clear. The bandage had to stay in place for a full week to optimize the chances of success for the experimental treatment they had attempted. "How does one know if day is breaking when one can't see anything?" she asked Ethan, who, true to his promise, had barely left her bedside. She heard the rustling of his clothes as he leaned toward her, felt the warmth of his hand taking hers. "The sounds change," he replied softly. "The city wakes differently. The air becomes crisper. And there's a particular quality to the silence just before dawn, as if the world is holding its breath before plunging into a new day." Olivia smiled beneath her bandage. These 3 days in total darkness had taught her more about Ethan than the previous weeks. Without the visual filter, she perceived the nuances of his voice, the micro-silences that punctuated his phrases, the way his breathing imperceptibly accelerated when he spoke of things that deeply moved him. "Tell me again," she murmured. "What happened after your divorce?" Ethan sighed, and she imagined his expression, that particular furrowing of brows that created a vertical line between his eyes. "I lost myself," he began, picking up the thread of a story he had been revealing to her in fragments since her hospitalization. "I abandoned my position at the Chicago Art Institute, traveled for nearly a year without any real purpose, Venice, Florence, Madrid. Searching in the works of old masters for an answer I couldn't find." He paused, and she felt his fingers tighten slightly around hers. "It was in Barcelona, in front of a mirror with a half-erased face, that I understood something essential. I had spent my life restoring works, bringing them back to a perfect state that perhaps had never existed. But true beauty perhaps resided in imperfection, in the transformation that time imposed." Olivia absorbed these words that strangely resonated with her own situation. "That's why you understood me from the beginning," she murmured. "You saw my degeneration not as a tragedy but as a metamorphosis." "I saw an artist refusing to be defined by her limitations," he gently corrected. "Exactly what I would have wanted to be in your place." Silence settled between them, comfortable and intimate like a blanket shared on a winter night. "The exhibition opens in 3 days, Olivia finally said, "and I'll still be like this." Her voice betrayed a vulnerability she tried to conceal. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. She who had wanted to show the world how she saw despite her condition would be blind on the opening day. "James has proposed to postpone," Ethan began. "No," Olivia firmly interrupted. "The exhibition must open as planned, with or without me." She felt Ethan stand up, his footsteps echoing on the tiled floor as he paced, a gesture she had learned to recognize as a sign of intense reflection. "What if," he began, before interrupting himself as if reconsidering his idea. "What if what? What if the absence of vision became the last stage of your exhibition?" Olivia sat up slightly, intrigued despite her apprehension. "What do you mean?" Ethan returned to sit near her, his enthusiasm palpable in his voice. "The journey begins with your early works, showing how you saw the world before. Then the paintings evolve, revealing the progressive transformation of your perception. And at the end of the journey, visitors themselves experience blindness," completed Olivia, immediately grasping the idea. "A space in total darkness where they'll have to use their other senses." "Exactly," confirmed Ethan. "With textures to touch, sounds, scents. There's sensory immersion that would allow them to feel, if only for an instant, a fraction of your experience." For the first time since the operation, Olivia felt creative excitement overtake her again. Her mind bubbled with ideas for this unexpected conclusion to the exhibition. "We would need audio recordings," she thought aloud, "my voice guiding visitors, explaining what I've learned in darkness. Textures corresponding to my paintings, the roughness of impasto, the smoothness of washes." "I'll take care of it," affirmed Ethan, with a determination that warmed Olivia's heart. "With the help of your family." "My family? Your sister stopped by yesterday while you were sleeping. She wants to help. Your father, too." An unexpected emotion tightened Olivia's throat. Her family, whom she had kept at a distance out of fear and pride, was gathering around her. "And my mother?" she asked hesitantly. "She's selecting fabrics for the sensory installation," replied Ethan with a smile in his voice. "Apparently, her experience as a dancer gives her a particular sensitivity to textures." Olivia let out a laugh that transformed into a sob halfway. In the darkness imposed by her bandage, she discovered a light she hadn't seen coming, that of the love and support surrounding her. "I won't be able to see the exhibition," she murmured, a tear escaping from under her bandage. She felt Ethan's hand gently wipe away this solitary tear. "You'll see it in a way that no one else will ever be able to experience," he said, with infinite tenderness. "Through the reactions of visitors, through their emotions, through the way they'll talk about what they've seen. And I will be your eyes for as long as you want." In this moment suspended between darkness and light, Olivia understood that her greatest fear, being defined by what she was losing, had transformed into something unexpected, the discovery of what she was gaining. The opening day arrived in an effervescence that contrasted with Olivia's forced calm. In a small room set up at the back of the Whitney Museum, she waited, hands trembling, for the time to appear before the crowd of critics, journalists, and art lovers who had turned out in large numbers for the event. Dr. Mercer had removed her bandage that very morning, warning her that her vision would be unstable for several days, periods of relative clarity alternating with moments of more pronounced blurring. For now, she distinguished shapes and colors as through a gauze veil, sufficient to move around, but not enough to fully appreciate the details of her own works. "How do you feel?" asked Rachel, adjusting the midnight blue dress Olivia had chosen for the occasion. "Terrified," she admitted with a nervous smile. "What if no one understands? If this exhibition is just an exercise in self-pity, as Mom feared?" Rachel took her sister's face in her hands, gently forcing her to look at her. "I've seen the exhibition, Olivia. It's not pity you're going to inspire, but admiration. You've transformed something deeply personal into a universal experience about perception, transformation, resilience." A light knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Ethan entered, elegant in a dark suit that contrasted with his usual casual studio attire. He stopped short upon seeing Olivia, an expression of pure wonder crossing his face. "You're magnificent," he said simply. Rachel discreetly slipped out, leaving the two alone in the intimacy of this moment. "How are the reactions?" asked Olivia, nervous. Ethan approached, taking her hands in his. "Extraordinary. There's a line extending to the end of the block. The Secretary of Culture has already arrived, as well as 3 directors of international museums. And," he hesitated, as if keeping the best news for last, "and your ophthalmologist is here too, with several of his patients affected by retinal degeneration. Your story has touched them, Olivia. You've created something that goes beyond art. You've given a voice and visibility to an experience that many go through in isolation." Tears came to Olivia's eyes, further blurring her already fragile vision. Ethan tenderly wiped them away with his fingertips. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. "Not really," she admitted, with a small, nervous laugh. "But let's go anyway." Ethan offered her his arm, and together they went out to face the spotlight and the murmur of the crowd that intensified at their appearance. The journey through the exhibition was a surreal experience for Olivia. Although she knew each painting by heart, seeing them hung in this solemn space surrounded by people contemplating them attentively gave them a new dimension. Her fluctuating vision transformed the experience into a succession of impressions, sometimes clear, sometimes blurred, like the paintings themselves that documented her changing perception. The comments she caught in passing touched her deeply. It's as if Hopper and Turner had merged to create something entirely new. You physically feel the transformation of her vision. It's the first time I truly understand what it means to see differently. In front of the last room, the space of total darkness they had created, stood her mother, welcoming visitors with moved dignity and explaining to them the principle of this sensory experience. When she caught sight of Olivia, her face lit up with unbridled pride. "My daughter," she murmured, embracing her, "you've created something extraordinary. Forgive me for not seeing it sooner." In this moment of reconciliation, Olivia felt a missing piece of her heart fall back into place. The exhibition, born of her fear and resistance, had become a bridge not only between her and the public, but also between her and her own family. Later in the evening, as the crowd began to thin, Ethan led her to a small side room that she didn't remember having included in the journey. "What is this?" she asked, intrigued. "My personal contribution," he replied mysteriously, opening the door. The space was plunged into a half-darkness, illuminated only by small directional lights that illuminated a series of photographs on the wall. Coming closer, Olivia recognized with astonishment her own face, a visual chronology capturing her moments of work in the studio, her expressions of intense concentration, of doubt, of creative joy. In each image, Ethan had captured something of her that she herself had never seen, an intense beauty in her vulnerability, a quiet strength in her moments of uncertainty. "You've been photographing me all this time?" she murmured, moved beyond words. "I documented the process as agreed," he replied softly. "But these photos were for me, to capture the extraordinary woman I was getting to know, not just the artist, but the person." He approached her, his gaze more expressive than all the words he could have spoken. "While you were learning to see the world differently through your condition, I was learning to see differently through you, to understand that beauty doesn't reside in perfection, but in constant transformation. That true art often arises from limitations that are transcended." He took her face in his hands with infinite tenderness. "I've fallen in love with you, Olivia Harlow. Not despite your condition, but with it, because it's part of who you are, of this courageous and brilliant woman who refuses to let anything define the limits of her creativity." In this intimate room, away from the gazes and whispers of admiration, Olivia felt something bloom within her, a feeling that had germinated in adversity and now flowered in the subdued light of this shared revelation. "I may see the outside world less well," she murmured, drawing closer to him, "but I've never seen so clearly what truly matters." Their lips met in a kiss that carried the promise of a new beginning, not the end of a struggle, but the start of a shared adventure, where each change, each challenge, would become an opportunity to see life in a new light. 6 months had passed since the triumphant opening of the Visual Metamorphoses exhibition. The success had exceeded all expectations. After New York, the exhibition had traveled to London, then to Paris, everywhere eliciting the same mix of artistic fascination and awareness, raising about visual disorders. In the studio, bathed in the golden light of spring, Olivia contemplated a new canvas, her gaze alternating between moments of clarity and more blurred phases, a rhythm to which she had become accustomed since the experimental treatment had partially stabilized her condition. She would never be completely cured, but this stabilization offered her a precious creative reprieve. The phone rang, displaying the name of her art agent. After the exhibition, proposals had poured in, prestigious galleries, private commissions, invitations to artist residencies. Her career had taken an unexpected turn, her altered vision paradoxically becoming her most distinctive artistic signature. "Yes, Tyler," she answered, wedging the phone between her shoulder and ear while continuing to paint. No, I haven't decided yet about the Guggenheim proposal. Yes, I understand it's an exceptional opportunity. She smiled, hearing the affectionate exasperation of her agent. For the past few months, she had been taking her time with each decision, savoring the luxury of being able to choose her path rather than being carried away by the urgency to create before her sight completely disappeared. I promise you an answer by the end of the week, she concluded before hanging up. Footsteps on the stairs announced Ethan's arrival. Since the exhibition, he had progressively moved his restoration workshop to her place, transforming part of the space into a miniature laboratory where he worked on independent projects while continuing his collaborations with museums. I brought lunch, he announced as he entered, carrying a paper bag from which escaped a delicious aroma of fresh bread and cheese. He approached, placing a kiss on her forehead, then examined the painting in progress with attention. You've changed the angle of the light, he observed. It gives a completely different dimension to the scene. Olivia smiled, touched as always by his ability to notice the details of her work. Their relationship had deepened over these last months, nurtured by a mutual understanding that transcended words. Ethan had learned to be her eyes when she needed it, without ever treating her as a diminished person. And she had learned to trust him, to lean on him without fearing to lose her independence. I received an interesting proposal this morning, she said, washing her hands in the studio sink. The Institute for the Young Blind invites me to create a tactile art program, teaching visually impaired or blind children to express their creativity. Ethan set the plates on the small table near the window, reflecting on this news. What do you think? I hesitate, admitted Olivia, sitting across from him. I've never taught, and I'm not yet totally blind. Do I have the legitimacy to do it? Ethan cut the still warm bread, the comforting scent invading the space between them. You have something that few people possess, the experience of transition. You understand both the world of the sighted and the one that's opening up to you now. It's precisely this intermediate position that makes you so valuable. Olivia pondered these words while savoring the simple but delicious meal. Over the months, she had discovered that her gustatory and olfactory perception was becoming more refined as her vision diminished, a natural compensation that unexpectedly enriched her daily experience. I also had news from my mother, she said after a moment. She has started dancing again. Not professionally, of course, but she's giving expressive movement classes for seniors. She says that my exhibition reminded her that limitations can become strengths if approached differently. Ethan smiled, happy about this evolution. The relationship between Olivia and her family had been profoundly transformed since the exhibition, a new mutual understanding replacing the tensions of before. And you? She asked, noticing a contained excitement in his attitude. I seem to have something to tell me. Ethan hesitated for an instant, then pulled out an envelope from his pocket. I received a proposal from MoMA. They want to create a special restoration department focused on accessible art, developing methods so that works can be appreciated by visually impaired people. Tactile techniques, 3D reproductions, sensory translations of masterpieces. That's wonderful, exclaimed Olivia, sincerely enthusiastic. It's exactly what you're made for. There's an important detail, added Ethan, his gaze softening. They want it to be a joint project, you and me, combining our expertise. The silence that followed was charged with possibilities. Olivia felt an intense emotion overtake her, not the fear that had so long accompanied her in the face of the future, but a deep excitement at the idea of this new path opening up before them. We could create something unique, she murmured, her mind already bubbling, imagining art no longer just as a visual experience, but as a complete sensory symphony. Ethan took her hand across the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in this gesture that had become so familiar. That's what I love about you, Olivia Harlow. You never see the limits, only the possibilities. In the spring light that transformed the studio into a golden casket, Olivia contemplated the man who had chosen to share her journey. Through him, through his love and understanding, she had discovered that losing one way of seeing the world didn't mean losing its beauty, only perceiving it differently, perhaps even more deeply. I have a condition, she said, with a mischievous smile. Which one? That you officially move in here. No more going back and forth between our two apartments. A life together completely. Ethan stood up, walked around the table, and knelt before her, his face level with hers. "I was waiting for you to ask me," he murmured, before tenderly kissing her. In this kiss, in this shared promise, Olivia felt that her life was taking on a new color, a shade she would never have imagined in her palette before, but which proved to be richer and more vibrant than anything she had known until then. The amphitheater of the Institute for the Young Blind buzzed with palpable excitement. Exactly 1 year after the opening of the Visual Metamorphoses exhibition, Olivia stood on the stage, her heart beating at a frantic rhythm. Before her, about 50 children and teenagers, some totally blind, others visually impaired like her, awaited the presentation of their collective exhibition. "Art isn't just what you see," she began, her voice carrying to the back of the hall. "It's what you feel, what you imagine, what you create from all our perceptions." Her sight had continued to evolve over the course of the year, days of relative clarity alternating with darker periods. But she had learned to navigate this changing landscape, transforming each new limitation into a creative challenge. The exhibition she was inaugurating today represented the culmination of 6 months of intensive workshops with these exceptional young artists. Touching Light, a project that reinvented visual art as a multi-sensory experience accessible to all. "When I started losing my sight, I thought I was losing my identity as an artist," she continued with an honesty that captivated her audience. "But these young talents have taught me that creativity doesn't depend on what we lose, but on what we choose to cultivate." Her gaze traveled over the room, distinguishing the blurred silhouettes of her students, their families, representatives of cultural institutions who had come to discover this revolutionary approach to art. In the front row, Ethan watched her with a pride that warmed her heart. At his side, her entire family was present, her mother, her father, her sister Rachel, with her newborn in her arms. "The exhibition you're about to discover is unique of its kind," continued Olivia with contained emotion. "Each work can be experienced in multiple ways, seen, touched, heard, sometimes even tasted or smelled. Art thus becomes a universal language that transcends all sensory limitations." The applause that followed resonated as a validation of all the distance traveled. Olivia descended from the stage to join Ethan, who welcomed her with a comforting embrace. "They're going to love it," he murmured in her ear. "It's revolutionary." Hand in hand, they guided the first visitors through the exhibition. Each work represented a collaboration between Olivia, Ethan, and a young artist. Tactile sculptures with multiple textures, sound installations that reacted to touch, relief paintings using aromatic materials. Lily, a blind-from-birth teenager whose sculptural talent had particularly moved Olivia, was waiting for them near her work, an abstract representation of music transformed into waves of colored plaster. "Miss Harlow!" she exclaimed, recognizing Olivia's footsteps. "What do you think of the final version?" Olivia took the time to explore the work with her hands, following the curves and crests that visually translated the sound variations of a Gershwin composition. "It's extraordinary, Lily," she replied sincerely. "You've captured exactly the essence of the music in a form that everyone can understand, whether they see or not." The teenager's radiant smile was worth all the world's successes. In these moments, Olivia realized how much her own loss had opened unexpected doors, not only for her, but for all these young people who finally found a space where their unique perception of the world was valued rather than considered a handicap. Later in the evening, while the exhibition was experiencing resounding success, Olivia slipped away for a few minutes to breathe in the Institute's garden. Night had fallen, transforming New York into a symphony of blurred, twinkling lights that danced at the limit of her perception. Ethan joined her, slipping an arm around her waist with that tender familiarity that characterized their relationship. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About all the distance traveled," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. 2 years ago, I thought my life as an artist was over. Today I realize it was just beginning." Ethan contemplated the night landscape with her, respecting this moment of reflection. "MoMA confirmed this morning," he said finally. "Our accessible art department officially opens next month. 5 international museums have already asked to collaborate with us." The project they had developed together was taking on a scope that neither one could have imagined. Their innovative approach to art, merging Ethan's restoration techniques with Olivia's transformed artistic vision, was creating a new way of apprehending cultural heritage. "We're really changing things, aren't we?" murmured Olivia, a deep emotion in her voice. "You are changing things," corrected Ethan. "I'm just following your extraordinary inner light." In the intimacy of this New York garden, Olivia pulled from her pocket a small box that she had carried all day, waiting for the perfect moment. "I have something for you," she said, holding it out to him. Surprised, Ethan opened the box to discover an antique key, patinated by time, suspended from a silver chain. "What is—" "The key to the house in Vermont," explained Olivia with a smile. "The one we talked about. I bought it last week, an old farmhouse near Burlington, with a studio bathed in that northern light you love so much." Ethan remained speechless with surprise, his fingers caressing the key like a talisman. "Our refuge," she continued softly. "A place to create, to teach, perhaps away from the New York tumult. Not now, not right away, but when we're ready. Our next chapter." He drew her against him in an embrace that said everything words couldn't express. Gratitude, love, wonder, before this woman who, facing adversity, always chose to create new possibilities. "I have another piece of news," murmured Olivia against his neck, her voice barely audible. "We won't be alone in this house." She took his hand and placed it gently on her belly, still flat, but bearer of a promise that would forever change their lives. "You're—" Ethan broke off, unable to finish his sentence. So much was the emotion gripping him. "2 months pregnant," confirmed Olivia, "our most personal masterpiece." In the silent garden, under a starry sky that she could barely distinguish but whose infinite presence she felt, Olivia realized that she had found something more precious than the perfect vision she had so feared to lose, an inner clarity that illuminated her world in a way that her eyes could never have done. 3 years later, the Vermont sun flooded the terrace of the restored farmhouse. Olivia was sitting under the pergola covered with wisteria, their purple clusters creating dancing shadows on the table where she modeled clay with precise and confident gestures. Her vision had stabilized in a state of permanent half-light, a world of blurred forms and accentuated contrasts where only a few vivid colors persisted like beacons in the mist. "Mom, look what I made." The clear little voice of Lily, 2.5 years old, resonated in the garden scented with lavender and rosemary. The little girl was running toward her, her brown curls bouncing to the rhythm of her steps, proudly holding a sheet of paper covered with colorful spots. Olivia set down her tools and held out her arms to welcome her daughter, this daily miracle that had transformed her life in a way she could never have imagined. "Show me this masterpiece," she said, drawing the child onto her knees. Lily placed the drawing directly under her eyes, intuitively understanding her mother's visual limitations. At her young age, she had already developed an extraordinary sensitivity, naturally adapting her behavior so that Olivia could fully participate in her life. "It's our house," she explained, with the solemn importance of children. "And here are you, Daddy, me, and here's Patch." Olivia smiled, distinguishing the approximate shapes, the white house, the human silhouettes, and the tabby cat that had adopted their family as soon as they arrived in Vermont. The colors that Lily used were always vivid, as if she instinctively chose hues that her mother could still perceive. "It's magnificent, sweetheart. Do you want us to hang it in the studio with the others?" Lily nodded vigorously, before jumping from her mother's knees to run toward Ethan, who was returning from the nearby village, his arms laden with fresh produce. The life they had built here, away from the New York hustle and bustle, had proven richer and more fulfilling than Olivia would have dared to hope. The old stone farmhouse, lovingly restored, now housed 2 luminous studios, hers dedicated to sculpture and ceramics, mediums she had explored with passion as painting became more difficult, and Ethan's, where he continued his restoration projects while simultaneously developing new tactile art techniques. Twice a month, they welcomed groups of visually impaired children for sensory art workshops. The rest of the time, they shared their life between their creative projects, their continued collaboration with MoMA, and Lily's education. This luminous child who was growing up with a unique perception of the world, straddling the conventional vision and the heightened sensitivity to other senses that her parents transmitted to her. Ethan approached, depositing a kiss on Olivia's forehead before sitting beside her. "News from New York," he announced, pulling a letter from his pocket. "The Guggenheim wants to extend our accessibility program to their entire collection of abstract expressionists. And your mother called. The adapted dance school she created is receiving a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. Olivia smiled, touched by these developments. Her mother, Diane, had found a new vocation creating a dance school for disabled people, directly inspired by her daughter's journey. Their relationship, once strained by mutual misunderstanding, had transformed into a creative partnership that enriched both their lives. "And the traveling exhibition?" she asked, resuming her work on the clay. "Tokyo in September, then Sydney. Tickets for the opening conference are already sold out." The Visual Metamorphoses exhibition had taken on an international dimension that they would never have imagined, traveling around the world and inspiring other artists confronted with similar challenges. Olivia continued to add new works to it each year, documenting the evolution of her perception and the creative adaptations she developed. Lily returned to them, settling on her father's knees to observe her mother modeling clay. Her small hands unconsciously mimicked Olivia's gestures, absorbing this tactile language as naturally as spoken language. "What are you making, Mom?" she asked, curious as always. "A sculpture for the fall exhibition," replied Olivia, guiding her daughter's fingers on the moist clay. "Do you feel these shapes? They tell a story." "What story?" Olivia exchanged a glance with Ethan, that glance which, despite her diminished sight, always communicated a deep complicity, a mutual understanding that transcended words. The story of a woman who thought she was losing her world and who discovered that it was simply becoming different, richer in a way, deeper, more intense. Lily nodded with that particular seriousness of children faced with essential truths. "Like when you close your eyes to better listen to music?" Olivia smiled, amazed by her daughter's intuitive wisdom. "Exactly like that, darling." Evening was gently falling on the Vermont countryside, bathing the landscape in a golden light that Olivia perceived as a diffuse warmth rather than a precise visual spectacle. Ethan lit the lanterns suspended from the pergola, creating a luminous halo that defined their family space in the growing dusk. Later, after putting Lily to bed, they settled on the terrace with glasses of local wine, savoring the scented silence of the New England night. Crickets were singing their summer melody, and in the distance, the village church bell was ringing 9 o'clock. "I regret nothing, you know," Olivia suddenly said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Sometimes I wonder if I would have become the artist I am today without this trial. Without you." Ethan took her hand, gently caressing the palm marked by years of artistic work. "You would have found your way, one way or another," he said with conviction. "You've always had this inner light. The retinitis just changed the way it expresses itself." Olivia stood up, drawing him toward her in a fluid movement that testified to her perfect mastery of space, despite her limited vision. "Dance with me," she murmured, naturally slipping into his arms. Without any music other than the song of the crickets and the light rustling of the breeze through the maple trees, they danced slowly on the terrace, their bodies finding that familiar rhythm, born of years of shared life. Olivia closed her eyes, savoring the sensation of absolute security in the arms of this man who had chosen to see the world through her, with her, for her. "Do you know what I've understood after all these years?" she asked softly. "Tell me. That seeing isn't just a question of external light, it's also, and perhaps mostly, a question of inner light, that clarity that allows us to discern the essential beyond appearances." Ethan held her more tightly, touched by this truth they had discovered together. "That's what you've taught so many people," he murmured against her hair. "Beginning with me." The Vermont night enveloped them in its dark velvet, punctuated with stars that Olivia no longer distinguished, but whose eternal presence she felt. In this scented garden, between the walls of this house that already resonated with so many memories, she experienced a fullness she would never have thought possible at the time of the diagnosis that had upended her life. Her vision continued to transform day after day, season after season. But she had ceased to fear these changes, now welcoming them as invitations to explore new ways of perceiving and creating. Each limitation became a challenge, each challenge an opportunity, each opportunity a rebirth. And in this silent dance under the invisible stars, Olivia Harlow celebrated the most beautiful of discoveries, that of a love and a life which, far from being diminished by adversity, had revealed themselves infinitely richer and deeper through it. "I love you," she murmured simply. "And I love you," replied Ethan, his voice carrying all the promises of a future they would continue to create together, chisel stroke after chisel stroke, day after day, in the precious stone of their shared life.